Should we read the Bible as we study the stars? Subscribe and click that bell for all things Bible. It's another day and another topic to dive into, and this episode is all about the Bible and astronomy. For those of you who weren't homeschooled, the word astronomy is a compound word. The suffix onomy means measurement or management, and the prefix astro is a baseball team in Texas. This makes the prefix suffix astronomy or astronomy, since there's a double O. Thus, the word astronomy is the official title for the manager of the Houston Astros. However, 99.99999% of the world's population are completely unaware of the true definition of this word. So, for the purposes of this video, we'll humor them and their idea that it has something to do with the stars. And that brings us to the book of Job. Now, Job is regarded by many to be the oldest book in the Bible, with the actual events of the account taking place somewhere around 2200 BC. This would make Job a contemporary of Abraham. And if it's bugging you that I'm pronouncing his name like that, well, tough. It's kind of my Job. The basics of the book of Job are God allowing the most righteous man on the planet to be put to the test by Satan to see if he will in turn curse God and die. Then we have Job's horrible friends showing up to tell him how terrible of a person he is for 38 chapters, and then God showing up, putting everybody in their place, including Job, before restoring him to what he had before, and then some. A bit of an oversimplification, but hey, this video is supposed to be about stars. For being such an ancient book, the information inside it has some pretty incredible scientific accuracy. For example, in chapter 26 verse 7, when referring to God, Job says, "He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing." I mean, that's how I would describe it. And it's a pretty far cry from what people thought about the earth at the time. The Mayans thought we lived on the back of a giant alligator. The Vikings believed everything was built on a giant tree, and there were even some in Europe who thought Columbus would fall off the edge of the earth when he made his 1492 voyage. So the fact that this very ancient book says that the earth hangs on nothing is pretty remarkable.
It's almost like the guy who made the world wrote a book about it.
But the really good stuff comes when God interrupts Job's friend's little,
Group therapy session?
Yeah, that. And then delivers a smackdown for the ages. For the next several chapters, God reads off the most impressive resume in all of history, including his mastery over animals, the weather, and even space itself. It would have been absolutely epic and also pretty awkward. I mean, imagine you're one of Job's friends, and for the last few days you've been spouting off about what God is really like, but then God shows up, and he's all like,
"This is where you zip it, all right? The adult is talking."
That's right. We want to get copyright claims from both Disney and Warner Brothers. Starting in Job 38, God casually drops bits of information that humans at the time couldn't possibly have known, and that modern science would still be in the dark about thousands of years later. Things like electricity having the potential for communication, the fact that there are springs on the ocean floor. And did he just mention the Ice Age?
Then, God starts talking about stars.
First he says in Job 38:7, "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God
shouted for joy."
Sons of God here being a reference to angels, since the same term is used earlier in Job. But the stars are, well, stars. Did you know stars sing? Yeah, sounds like this. They may never get on the Gaither Homecoming, but they definitely make music. But the amazing thing is we have to use incredibly powerful equipment to even see distant stars, much less record them. The theory that stars might possibly emit sound waves first really became popular in, wait for it, the mid-2010s. It all started when scientists at the University of York were shooting high-powered lasers at plasma because apparently curing the common cold is too boring. However, they discovered that when the plasma was changing in densities, it emitted a sound that was 6 million times higher than what a human could hear. And please do not ask me how they found that out. One of the only places that this experiment occurs naturally is in stars. And after much more research, they discovered that stars do in fact sing. But here's the thing. Sound doesn't really travel in the vacuum of space. It took extremely powerful equipment to even get sound from the closest of stars. So if you lived 4,000 years ago, how could you possibly know they make music?
It's almost like the guy who made the stars also wrote a book about them.
We're trying to be as clear as we can here, but if you still aren't getting it, we're saying this information is divine in origin. But God does not stop there. No, he starts mentioning stars by name and giving some pretty specific characteristics of them.
Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth?
Let's take these one at a time, shall we? The first one God mentions is the Pleiades. Pleiades is a large group of stars in the Taurus constellation. It's also called 7 stars because usually only 7 of them can be seen with the naked eye. However, if your eyes would dress modestly, you might see 800 to 1,000. These stars have the same chemical composition, travel in the same direction, and are gravitationally attracted to each other. So in essence, they aren't drifting apart, neither are they crossing paths on their way to different destinations. Rather, they are traveling as one.
If giant balls of hydrogen burning at 30,000 degrees Celsius can get along, why can't you? Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity.
Sounds like sweet influences to me. Food for thought. But the real takeaway is Pleiades is held together. It's as if God is telling Job, I can grab 1,000 stars and bind them as one. Can you? Then we move to Orion, probably the most familiar to us. The bands of Orion in verse 31 is probably a reference to Orion's belt. The 3 stars that comprise the belt are Alnitek and Mintaka, which are about 20 times bigger than the Sun, and Alnilam, which is 26 times bigger. Unlike Pleiades, these stars are not gravitationally attracted to each other, rather, they're drifting apart. Now God's telling Job, I can grab these massive stars and force them in opposite directions. What about you? Chump. Now Mazzaroth is a bit of a mystery. It's the only heavenly body that God mentions in this passage that has never really been positively identified. However, since he says Mazzaroth has a season, it's safe to assume that it came out during a certain time of the year or maybe years.
And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years.
Throughout the course of human history, we've used the sun, the moon, and the stars for our calendar, our work, our planting season, even the movement of the tides in the case of Pleiades. Some think that Mazzaroth could be Venus or possibly Ceres, but nobody is really certain. However, if we do discover what it is, you better believe we're gonna do a video about it right here.
And finally, Arcturus and his sons.
Arcturus is the brightest star in the northern hemisphere. It's a part of the constellation Bootes or Boetes or Boots. I mean, it was clearly made for walking. Seriously, Arcturus is barreling through the universe at about 1,000 miles per second. In 1718, Edmund Halley was the first person to discover the star's incredible movement across the night sky. But in addition to being faster than most known stars, Arcturus also has traveling companions. In the year 1971, the Arcturus stream was discovered. Over 50 stars with the same chemical makeup like Pleiades, all traveling together at a speed of 275,000 miles an hour. These stars are going somewhere really fast, and God is asking Job if he could possibly hope to guide them to their destination. It would be incredibly humbling to have the God of all creation ask you if you can gather stars together, force them apart, bring them in at a given time, or lead them out. And finally, to wrap up his expose of astronomical mastery, God asks Job, "Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth?" The heavenly bodies are a dependable, tightly wound clock that obeys certain rules. In fact, they are so dependable, the light from Arcturus was used to power an exhibit at the 1933 World's Fair. The giant plasma balls of space wield a tremendous amount of power, and only God has the authority to relegate them to a certain jurisdiction and tell them how much influence they can have on the earth. The point that God is making is, well, he's God, and Job, he ain't. But these little details about the stars, some of them incredibly specific, are downright astonishing. Keep in mind, it would be thousands of years before Galileo Galilei would first look through his telescope, and it wouldn't be till 1979 that Galileo Galilei would Figaro. Magnifico. Only the sovereign God who created heaven and earth could have known all of this. And as we study astronomy, we find what he was telling us all along really was true. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and click that bell. And remember, don't trust what I say. Trust what he said.